got addicted to walking holidays after I discovered the West Highland Way in 2017, and I hope to do one each year. Walking holidays are a popular and inexpensive way to see Europe and offer a more authentic visit as well as giving you a chance to mix more with the locals. On today's show, we head to charming England and take on one of the UK's most splendid walks, considered by many to be one of the top walks in the world. We'll be walking England's coast-to-coast walk through the famous Lake District and through multiple national parks. I can't wait to share it with you, so let's get started. Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks. I first learned about the coast to coast when I was doing research to try to determine the UK's best walking holidays. That's an episode I did way back in the beginning of this program. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. So this coast to coast path had been on my radar since, and it finally made it to the top of my list this past spring. On my European trip, I had plans to do the boat and bike Greece, which I covered in the last episode, and also to walk an El Camino, the Primitivo route, which I'll cover in an upcoming show. Whenever I fly somewhere, I try to do multiple tours on the same continent so that I can make the flight cost a little bit more palatable. On my Antarctica expedition covered last spring, I met David, a Scot who lives near London, who also liked to hike. So he and I decided that on my next European tour, that together we would walk half of the coast-to-coast pathway. I didn't have time to walk the entire trail on this visit, so we chose to do the first half through the stunning Lake District, as that's considered the prettier part. We'd be walking for about a week, plus our start and end days, and about 80 miles or 130 kilometers. The entire trail is about 180 miles or 300 kilometers and can be walked in two sections of around a week each. The beauty of walking holidays is that your luggage gets transported each day, so all you're carrying is your day pack. You're staying in a comfortable inn each night, which means a nice hot shower plus a fun meal at a pub. You're walking on a self-guided tour, so you can take your time, get up when you want, take stops when you want. You have all day to walk however many miles are designated for that particular day. So you can mosey your way all the way to your night's accommodations, and generally on average they seem to be around 12 to 14 miles each day, but on most trips I've done so far, you're going to have a couple of longer days and sometimes a couple of shorter days, and that'll be due to the fact that sometimes the villages aren't quite where you'd like them to be for as long as you feel like walking that day. The coast to coast is a super popular trail, and in some of the smaller villages, there aren't many rooms to rent. So as soon as you decide you want to do this, it's super important that you book as soon as you can so that you'll have the best chance of getting in some of the more charming inns, or indeed in any inn at all in the popular seasons. We didn't find the path crowded because there's only so many rooms on the trail, but because of that, some of these small villages really do get sold out quickly. So again, I want to repeat, you want to book this as far in advance as you can. There was one day, in fact, on our trip that they weren't able to find lodging, that we had to do a transfer back and forth. So there's workarounds, but it's just so much easier if you just book far enough advance that you get to stay in the towns that you want and in the kinds of inns that you want to stay in. And of course, if you do go on this or any of the walking holidays in Europe, I would recommend that you go with my affiliate, One Foot Abroad. Not only will they make all the arrangements for you, and your inns do include breakfast, but they also arrange for that luggage transfer that's so nice, and will give you maps and books and offer really important 24/7 assistance in case you ever have any questions or problems. You have somebody that you can reach right away to help you solve whatever your issue might be. They can also help if you want to add in a rest day or if you need help with transfers to and from the starting and end points. And as an Active Travel Adventure listener, you are entitled to 5% off using my exclusive promo code ATA5, ATA5. Not only will you be saving money, but at no additional cost to you, you'll be helping to support the program, for which we're all very grateful. So once you've booked your self-guided tour, your only other vacation expenses are your lunch, dinner, snacks, and any drinks, your transportation to and from the trail, and travel insurance. So like I said, walking holidays are super economical because you are the guide. You've got all the resources with you so you can feel confident that you can get to where you need to go each day. And it makes it a super affordable way to see Europe. The Coast to Coast Trail starts at St. Bees, We start off at a charming B&B with the hostess Lulu. This is a colorful lady with a super big personality who made us feel right at home and welcomed us warmly into our downtown inn. On a walking holiday, your day one is getting to the start point. So if you're flying into London, you can catch the train to the cute little village of St. Bees. It's on the Irish Sea that opens up into the Atlantic on England's west coast. After a hearty breakfast in the morning, it was time to start our walk. We'd met Shannon during breakfast, and we would run into her leapfrogging throughout our walk. Shannon's a young gal and was walking solo. And this is definitely a trail you can safely walk solo. People along the path are very friendly, and you're likely to meet others that you can walk with if you so choose, whether just for a couple of hours or for the entire day, or possibly even the entire route. Also, on these walking holidays, you're walking along paths used by locals as well, so it's not uncommon to strike up a conversation with a villager out walking her dog, for example. From our inn, we walk the short distance to the sea, where there's a marker anointing the start of the trail. Then you hike up this huge, large bluff that's overlooking the water and get a great view of the shoreline and St. Bees down below. Since Dave and I were hiking in late April, we were surrounded by enormous, bright yellow flowering rapeseed. Just fields and acres of yellow. It's beautiful. Rapeseed is a plant grown for the production of its edible vegetable oils, animal feed, and biodiesel. And like I said, we saw hundreds of acres of these bright yellow flower fields. It was something to see. Something else we saw a ton of on our entire walk were sheep farms, and at this time of year, the ewes had given birth. So the fields were full of mamas, and usually they seem to have 2 lambs just gambling about. It was a nice fitting bookend since I had done the sheep moving earlier this season. You can learn about that on the Power of Yes episode, and now I got to see the babies. It was very exciting to me. And every time I thought I had taken enough lamb photos, I would see a cute little lamb that would prove me wrong, and out would come the camera again. I took well over 100 lamb photos, and that's not exaggerating. They were so stinking cute. And David was a saint not to complain about my frequent stop to snap just one more cute lamb. At one of my favorite inns, we were actually on a sheep farm, and they were out munching on the pasture right outside the bedroom window. Now that is a fun way to greet the morning. Near St. Bees is the Sellafield nuclear plant, which presently processes and stores nuclear waste. David and I had taken a tour of the museum the day before, which is how I even knew about it. And so when we were up in this bluff, we'd probably hiked, I don't know, a few miles outside of town, but we're up in this tall hill that we could see forever and ever, and we could see the plant. We're enjoying a nice break, the beautiful view, and then suddenly we hear the wail of an emergency alarm. And it's a good thing that we had gone to the museum the day before, because we learned that they were doing a test that day. So we got a good laugh and decided that there are worse ways to die than by seeing the view we were enjoying had it not been a test. Our feet were tired at the end of the day's walk, having stepped almost 41,000 times, and I clocked at over 16 miles. The thing you need to know about walking holidays is generally they're not that hard, like technically they're not hard at all, generally speaking, and usually don't have many peaks to summit, or at least any tall peaks to summit, but you still need to train to get your body, and in particular your feet, used to stepping all day long, day after day, and that's the key. We can all do a long, hard day for one day, but then you got to get up in the morning and do it again, and the next morning and do it again and again. So it's super important to condition your body, and in particular your feet, to that daily pounding. For this particular walk, you can get by with trail runners, although if you have weak ankles, there are some rocky parts that are going to test your ankles. So I really wouldn't recommend sneakers. I think you should at least have the trail runners, and if you have weak ankles, maybe step it up to hiking shoes or boots. The heavy-duty hiking boots are overkill as far as I could see, because the paths are well trodden. They're either drover's trails or bridle trails, small rural roads and the like. But I would recommend bringing at least one hiking stick. In the national parks, of which you're going to go through several on this trail, it is more like hiking, so you want to make sure you do have good treads on whatever you're wearing on your feet. I also like wearing liner socks. I like the toe socks, the Injinji toe socks. I'll put a link in the show notes. Plus, I'll put over that wool socks, and they'll be thin or thick depending on the season, and I like them with plenty of padding, as much padding as I can get on the bottoms of my feet. If you get my newsletter, you'll get access to all of my packing checklists, in addition to the Coast to Coast travel planner and all the travel planners I've done for all the previous shows for the last 6 years now. I can't believe it's been 6 years. To get on the list, if you're not on it, you can email me at kit@activetraveladventures.com or go to the website and click on the newsletter link on the header so you can get on the list. I only email once a month and don't spam you or sell your name. You can also click on the Amazon link, scroll down to the show notes on the information on whatever app you're listening to, and that Amazon link will take you to my favorite gear page. Plus, when you access Amazon using my link, even if you don't buy anything on that page, but you do buy something, I get credit for whatever you do buy. So it's another way to help support the show at no additional cost to you and helps to keep it ad-free. For which, again, we all thank you for that. The ads on podcasts these days are driving me nuts, so I'm trying to do what I can to support this program without having constant interruptions for all the ads. So I hope you appreciate that and would appreciate anything you can do to help support this program. All right, so on the next day, Dave and I learned a very important lesson. Never assume. I know we should have known that already, but we didn't. And at this point, we're in the famous Lake District, and they call this area their mountainous region. I guess for England it is, even though I don't think anything's higher in the whole country more than 3,000 feet or 1,000 meters. The Lake District is famous for its composition of mountains, lakes, and the coastal scenery, and for its literary associations with William Wordsmith and other lake poets like Beatrix Potter and John Ruskin. Dave and I had stopped for lunch using one of the iconic rock walls that separate pastures as a backrest. We see a really tall relatively speaking, tall mountain straight ahead of us, and dually we make the assumption that we have to climb over that mountain. Since we both assumed that we had to get over it, we start heading for it and looked for a way how we're going to get up this mountain. It's pasture, so a lot of times in pastures, you just kind of work your way over to the pathy areas. And we didn't double check. Assumptions, don't do them. So we're walking, and we're like, is this the path? Maybe it's over there. So we walk over there, and we don't really see signs that other people have been walking on it. And it's still somewhat early in the walking season, so the path isn't really packed down at this point. So after walking maybe 15-20 minutes, and we saw no sign of a trail or any signs of any kind of a path, we decide that we're going to climb up to the adjacent smaller hill and scout. Once on top of that hill, we see way down below all the other hikers. So in our assumption that surely we had to climb the mountain, we never really closely looked for trail markers that would have been right by where we were sitting for lunch, and they would have told us that our assumption was wrong. But it's really hard to get lost. The trail is very well marked. Just always make sure when you get to a point where you're not real sure that you know how to get back to at least a base point. So if you get to an intersection and you're not sure, turn around so you know what that intersection looks like. Make a mental note, maybe make a scratch in the soil so you know which way you chose. And then that way, if you do have to turn around, you can go the other direction and get yourself back on trail. This way, I make sure that I can always find my way back safely. And out here, everything was pretty much open pasture. And David was using the Strava app, Strava, the Strava app. And with that, when we finally looked at that, we could see which direction the trail was supposed to be. And before long, we were back on that nice flat trail we should have been on like an hour before, going around the mountains through the passes. So the moral is, don't assume. Here's something really important about the coast to coast. The Lake District is known to be wet, and all the rain is one reason it's so pretty. So we expected showers, and only on the one afternoon did we get just the slightest of showers, but more impressively, we got a little hail, which was fun. It was tiny hail, but it was pretty, and I thought made things rather festive. For the rest of the trip, the most moisture we ever saw was a bit of mist, but that's the exception. You must make sure that you're prepared for rain and for cold in case it gets cold with that rain anytime you do this trip. And in fact, I'm always prepared for the 4 seasons no matter where I go. I'll always have a thermal jacket. I'll always have my rain jacket. And if it's a place where it can get really cold, I'll even have the rain pants. And of course, I'll always have my emergency kit catered to whatever the adventure is. And I've got all sorts of links to all this kind of stuff at the activetraveladventures.com website and my companion podcast, the Adventure Travel Show podcast, of the kinds of things that you need to think about when you plan any kind of an adventure to make sure you have the right gear with you. I'm exceptionally lucky when it comes to weather on my travels. I like to think that my grandmother on Dad's side is my weather and guardian angel, so it's not uncommon to hear me say, "Thanks, Gran," when I get lucky yet again. Now I've got some of my friends thanking Gran too whenever they are blessed with terrific weather. So on our coast to coast, we had splendid weather. And with that little bit of mist one day and that little bit of hail, that's it for the whole time we were out. On the day we got a little sidetracked, we eventually arrived at town, and it was darling. Our inn had a jacuzzi and a pub with a welcoming fireplace. We were, though, as David said, cream crackered, meaning we were pooped. The most challenging and I think the most beautiful day was our third day. And here we got very lucky, as the weather was clear, so not only did we get great views from our highest summit, we were also able to take one of the high trails because the weather was good and not too windy. This is one section in the park where there's multiple options that you could take. If the weather's bad, you can stay low. We took the high pass, and then they had a knife edge pass on the other side that Shannon took. Do not take that knife edge route unless you have zero fear of heights, though. Shannon had to help guide 2 women down because they got too scared of falling. If the weather's decent, I strongly recommend taking one of the high trails because the views are outstanding, and while it's certainly harder than the other days, it isn't overly hard if you're trained. In addition to beautiful views of lakes in the distance, one of my favorite things we saw along the trail was a striking yellow lichen attached to the boulders. Sometimes that lichen was even a neon green, and I loved all the variety. Another thing I found interesting in this part of England is that they use the dry stacked rocks to divide the pastures. But further south, like when I did the Cotswold Way, that's where they use hedgerows. We eventually make it to the cute town of Grasmere. It took us 7 hours to hike just over 11 miles, so it was a hard day. And according to my phone, we did the equivalent of 168 floors. Grasmere is noted for its gingerbread, so of course we had to stop to get some in the morning before we headed out. That day's trail was lovely with all the lake views. Often on this trail we're in national parks or otherwise on National Trust land that's open to the public. When we arrived at my favorite lodge of the entire trip, this is the one with the sheep out my window, the couple who runs the place, it's called the Crookbeck, converted old barns from the husband's family farm. In addition to having their little B&B, because it is a working farm, they offer wool products from their sheep and have a small shop. The place was darling, but they had unfortunate news for us. Remember how I told you it was important to book early as so many villages are tiny and they don't have many rooms? Well, tonight's problem was a first. There was nowhere to eat in town. We didn't realize it before we got there, and we didn't feel like walking a couple miles to the nearest grocery store or a nearby neighborhood that had a restaurant. A lot of the places that they did have might have been closed down due to COVID, and hopefully by the time you hear this, they've opened back up, or maybe we're too early in the season. The previous week there had been 2 restaurants, but one had just closed down, I'm guessing for financial reasons, maybe to remodel, I have no idea. The remaining one was only serving locals because they didn't have enough capacity to feed the walkers and the locals, so they decided to choose loyalty to their year-round customers. Since our B&B didn't have a kitchen license, they weren't allowed to cook for us. Our breakfast would be delicious but purchase goods. But the hostess did offer to make us a charcuterie tray. That's going to have to work. We also, after hiking so long that day, also really wanted a beer. The husband offered to take us back to the village to the only open pub, saving our tootsies an additional mile, and we gratefully accepted. The pub had a walk-ins welcome sign indicating they served food, but they were no longer doing so, and we never got an explanation why on that one either. They hadn't gotten their beer shipment that week, but they had some beer left in the keg. So after we had had one beer, they said it was time for them to close. We really wanted a second beer, and the bartender said he had some to-go cartons. I never heard of a beer to-go carton. And that's literally what he poured our beer into. It looked like a milk carton, but it was a beer carton. Dave and I thought that this was hysterical and laughed the whole mile back to our inn. Our charcuterie tray ended up being plentiful and surprisingly satisfying, so I was able to go to sleep with a full belly. Memo to self: keep a bit more emergency food in my pack. And remember, you'll have your main luggage that's getting transported each day, so you can put an extra stash in there, so have some in case you need it. In addition to the beautiful yellow rapeseed on the first day, this early spring we're still seeing daffodils and lots of primrose. Later on, we saw a bunch of heather, and later still, foxglove. We saw many small streams and a few small waterfalls, and lots of sheep. On one pasture, we passed some oddly colored black and white cows. Not splotchy black and white like you're thinking right now. These ones had a big fat black band circling their middle with whites in their front and their backs. They were very cool looking. We also had to go through a field with some bulls. These bulls, I'm going to guess 8, 10, 12 of them, stopped their munching and they're eyeing us. They weren't eyeing us like with snort coming out of their nose, but they were watching our every move. So we gave them a wide berth, and I was glad to cross the stile and leave that pasture. It's a good idea to keep plenty of space between you and any animal, cows included, especially mamas with their babies, as I learned in Spain, and you'll hear about that on my Primitivo episode. Even a sheep or a goat mama can get protective, so be smart and stay safe and keep your distance. In addition to the livestock, pastures, and flowers, you'll also see the charming stone buildings from homes to the outbuildings. I'll bet these buildings get cold in the winter, but they sure are delightful. You'll also see a lot of fairy tale stone arch bridges. The day we left the Lake District and entered the Pennines was a long walking day of over 20 miles. Here, the land's changed. Now these are vast rolling hills, sweeping rolling hills, completely different than the larger and higher hills and mountains we've just gone through. Like I said, sweeping across the plains, except for flat plains, they're just rolling hills that you can see as far as the eye can go. One rolling hill after another. It was fetching. And lots of lambs, seeming with more babies per ewe than the Lakes District, and I don't know why. Sadly, we came across a dead mama in the last pasture we crossed. We looked for the farmer and found him, and he said he wasn't surprised. He'd tried to catch her earlier so he could treat her, but she was still strong enough to be a good evader. That was a sad ending to that day's hike. But we soon got a little bit of comic relief. Sometimes when you get to town, you might be confused as to which way to turn to find your inn, because it's not like always right on the trail, depending on how far in advance you booked. Remember, book early. So David and I thought it was funny that we're depending on technology and apps, and we ran into the small group of young men, and they're poring over their paper map. We're all trying to figure out which way we had to turn to get to our respective inns. And speaking of apps, my All Trails app did not do well at all on the coast to coast, where David's Strava app did much better. But it is important to do like the young folks did and bring the paper map and the book that One Foot Abroad gives you. Don't forget, you can always break or lose your phone, or it could run out of juice, and you want to make sure that you've got a physical backup so that you can find your way around. In fact, on my last hike, I lost my phone permanently, fortunately, and since it was in airplane mode, I'm not able to find it, and so I had to replace it. Very expensive little mistake. At the end of the day, you want to make sure you know which way you want to go to find your inn, because you and your feet are very tired and you don't want to take any additional steps, or at least any unnecessary steps. And after this tough 20-mile day, David and I were just sitting in the lodge public room just enjoying an after-dinner beer when in walks Shannon, exhausted. She begs the bartender / innkeeper that was standing at the register, "How much will it take to bribe you for a room with a tub I can soak in?" Sadly, no amount would be enough, as all the rooms at this particular inn came with showers. As enjoyable as walking holidays are, you are often bushed, or as David said, cream crackered, when you make it to your inn. But you're also going to be very proud of yourself, because you've really accomplished something that most people can't do. And as mentioned, a lot of these small towns don't have many rooms to let, and sometimes they don't have a lot of options for dinner. Here, there were 2 decent restaurants. There was the fish and chips place, more highly recommended, and the one that we chose But that particular one closed at 7. Every place else closed at 8. Shannon, getting close to that 8 o'clock marker, dropped her bag so she could race to grab a bite before collapsing into bed. I knew that after 20 miles and a hard day, there was going to be some stragglers that would get to town and they would be hungry. There was one couple that we saw that the husband was struggling that day, and I was particularly worried about him. So I was delighted when we ran into them again the next day to find out that they had made it in time to enjoy a fun dinner. Speaking again of food, you're often going to be in the middle of nowhere when it comes time to eat lunch. So we would often just stop at a store in town before we headed out, buy a chunk of cheese and some fruit so we could nibble on something as a lunch break. David was also partial to crisps, or what I like to call potato chips. We usually tried to remember to get some chocolate as well. That was good for lunch or otherwise, just a little pick-me-up. The next day on the long rolling hills, we come to a puzzle, or at least it was a puzzle to me. Out on the grassy fields is an enormous boulder sitting on top of the grass in the middle of nowhere with no surrounding rocks. It's twice my size at least. It's just resting, this big round boulder sitting on top of a hill. How did it get there? David's a geologist, or at least he was before he retired, and he was able to explain. He said that when the glaciers were retreating, as the ice raked the earth, a glacier had left this jewel behind. I thought that was very interesting. We had booked our coast-to-coast walk pretty late, and for one town that most walkers stay in, because they had no room at the inn, we had to continue on because there was no room for us at the inn. So instead we took a detour and had a hot chocolate and a toastie, which is what David calls a grilled cheese sandwich, and then we sallied forth to our inn further down the road. And eventually we make it to Stephen Kirby. Not quite the halfway point, but the mental halfway point and the end of the first section of the coast-to-coast walk. We have walked for 7 days, and having a rest day is going to feel great. I think it's interesting that when I finally reach my destination on any of these walking holidays, that it can feel somewhat anticlimactic. Yes, you're proud of your accomplishment, but it truly is the journey and the new friends that you make, seeing all the scenery, your local encounters. Those are what bring you joy when you look back after your trip. It's really not that end point. And I would like to see, I was like, where's the parade and the balloons and all that? But it's not like that. And I've asked others and they feel the same way. They love it. They're delighted that they went, but it's not necessarily about getting to that end point. It's about just breathing in and just enjoying the moments that you're out there on the walk. If you're interested in taking a walking holiday, I can highly recommend this coast-to-coast walk. Either do half like David and I did, or if you have an extra 9 days, go the entire way to the North Sea and finish up at Robin Hood's Bay. I hope to do Section 2 one day. I've covered numerous long-distance walks and hikes on the Active Travel Adventures podcast and website. I recommend poking around that website and get some ideas for your next big adventure. If you want to walk Europe, please consider using my affiliate One Foot Abroad to make the arrangements. Remember, using promo code ATA5, ATA5 not only saves you 5%, but you're helping to support the show, again, at no additional cost to you. Do you know someone who likes to hike and might like to go on a walking holiday? Would you please do me the honor of sharing this podcast with him or her and help spread the word about Active Travel Adventures and this podcast? Word of mouth is the #1 way people find the show. Thank you, and thank you for listening. I really appreciate it and always welcome your feedback and comments. You can always reach me at kit@activetraveladventures.com. Until next time, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on!